So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to invite back Dwain and Saqib and Joe, because we want to give you the opportunity of picking up on the things that they were talking about earlier. There was so much of it there. Now, before we start, it's worth saying this, that lots of people have asked for Dwain's PowerPoint. There was so much stuff there, Dwain, and it kind of flashed before everybody's eyes. But Dwain has made that available, and I don't know how that's going to get to you, but Jim Currell, who we've not mentioned and isn't on screen, but is actually running everything here. He's the master of ceremonies. He's the guy that keeps this whole thing moving. So Joe now Jim now has those slides, and before the end of the conference, we'll tell you about how you can get hold of them. I'd like to start simply by asking you, Dwain, a question, and there's lots more to come. That was a tour de force of everything that you're doing in Oasis Academy Media City. Kind of dizzying, really. How much of this is just about, you know, it's doable if you've got a Dwain? How much is about a system? How much do you need someone with the energy that you clearly have?
You don't need another Dwain in your academy, because there's systems out there that can be replicated and implemented. For instance, there's a lot of networks outside of the trust who dedicate towards anti-racism and education. So for me, I do have a passion for equality and diversity. This is something that I've been studying for a long time, and having a chance to implement it has been my lifelong ambition. However, you don't need a Dwain. You just need to basically get a steering group, get like-minded people, look at your policies, start reviewing, and have those regular conversations with SLT and the stakeholders within your organization. Sometimes it can be easier said than done, but once again, there are methods where you can start introducing and drip feeding data, introducing some strategies, what's made an impact and attainment, to start changing those mindsets over time. So yeah, it can be done in any setting, any organization. It just takes one spark just to keep that catalyst going.
And Joe and Saqib, I don't want to box you off into your separate areas, because you're obviously both dealing with all of this stuff as well as the things that you talked about. What would be your comment, and what would you add to what Dwain has said? Who wants to go first? Saqib.
I always think back to like the 90s, Steve, and 90s TV, and how many people on TV really represented me, and how many people really represented working class communities in general. And Adele right now is a great example of someone who, when she speaks, she is so working class, she is so South London, but she is such a representation of those people, if you like. And I think representation is so important for young people. And having representation inside your curriculum should be a priority for every school. And so I think that idea of having like-minded people on a panel together who can actually discuss it within the school is a fantastic idea. And having a Dwain inside every school would be an absolute bonus. But the agenda should be very clear from the outset. And I think Dwain's answer around like structures and systems is the solution. And if Dwain is developing these structures and systems, and if every school can then adopt that within their curriculum and look through their look at their curriculum through the lens of equality and diversity, I think these things will only naturally progress.
Joe, I don't want to cut you out, and I'm sure you're not short of things to say about this.
No, I don't think you need a Dwain, but I think it certainly does help. I think you can have all the systems and structures in place, but it really does need people with passion leading on it, and people who actually truly understand it. And if you haven't got those people, it's about making sure your school community actually sees the benefit of this work. It's not an add-on. It's not something extra. It should be absolutely crucial to what you do. And if you get it right for Black and global majority students, you get it right for everybody. There's a famous sort of comic strip of it. It's outside of school. It's a snow day. And you've got the janitor. He's getting all the snow as quick as he can off the steps. And there's one wheelchair user by the ramp saying, "Excuse me, can you sort the ramp?" And he goes, "I'll get to you after I've sorted everybody else out." But actually, if you sorted the ramp first, everyone could get in. So if you get it right for Black global majority students, you're getting it right for everybody. It makes your life easier. It makes things better, in short.
Oh, that's a great illustration, Joe. Dwain, somebody said you concentrated, you did a deep dive, as you said, into history. And then you've all those other slides, you know, about how you decolonize the maths curriculum, for instance, and how you've done that by percentages. Those all flash by. But isn't it easier to do in history than it is in some other subjects? How do you decolonize maths?
It's through representation. So for instance, if you look into the history of maths, you know, the origins of maths, are you making sure that you're going back in terms of the representation on that side? For instance, you're looking back into numeracy from an Afrocentric perspective as well, through an average perspective as well, just the origins of mathematics. You know, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And this is a range of different subjects. So for instance, with science, there's various different Black scientists, Asian scientists, but should be put on the forefront rather than the same scientists what we've had in our curriculum for the last 40 years. We have to change that narrative. Someone mentioned before how we can increase teachers into the, you know, more Black and global majority teachers, again, through representation, through showing these pathways. So these pathways through different curriculum subjects are very important. We looked into in our groups, and big up to Joseph, I respect this guy so much, but we looked into, within these groups, we looked into discrete teaching and utilized learning. So when we start talking about utilized, how could we make sure that, number one, if we're teaching a topic to a group of students and you understand the context and the backgrounds of these students, how could we make it culturally relevant to them through an anti-racist lens? So it's all important, it all connects the dots, and it's a journey. So when we start talking about decolonization, everyone, we're on an anti-racist approach. Decolonization is a destination where we're working towards. It's going to take a while to look into individual subjects to ensure that, again, it is truly representative of the global diaspora, and also through different lenses, through the protected characteristics. So it's a journey that we're on, and yeah, it's been a good one.
Yeah, great, thanks, Dwain. Joe, one for you to lead on here. Somebody's said, they've not given us their name, but basically they're saying you talked about creating listening spaces, but they're saying, but what happens when you're already on the SLT, the senior leadership team in a school, and therefore you're a position in power, you're a person in power? How do you make a difference there? That you know all the stuff, but you're sitting there in a senior leadership team. How does this happen? And they're suggesting, is coaching the way, and could there be some kind of coaching program? How do we help people find their voice?
I've read the question correctly in the chat. They're looking at how you sort of leadership pathways and people developing the skills, coaching people to get the skills to get into leadership positions. So there's two parts to that, really. If you look at, like Dwain was saying, if you look at statistics, I can't remember off the top of my head, but teachers from a global majority, then it filters down into leadership and it gets down to head teacher. It gets smaller and smaller each time. So there's definitely something that's going wrong there. I think it's all well and good having the programs such as MPQA, and they've changed them recently. Leadership development courses, they're great, but what you actually need is mentoring rather than coaching, teaching people those sort of nuanced situations you might face as a Black or global majority leader. I was so blessed and fortunate to start my career at a school in inner city Birmingham with an absolutely dynamic Black female head teacher. Took the school from special measures to outstanding. It became a teaching school, but she really mentored me. She really guided me. I was probably promoted to a senior leadership position with her too early. She let me make my mistakes. She sort of pre-warned me from the pitfalls I might face as a Black and global majority leader, and really sort of helped me, guide me into leadership. Some of the things that she hadn't pointed out to me, I'd have fallen into traps. I'd have made mistakes. And as we all know, it's the elephant in the room, but Black and global majority leaders, we don't get second chances, we don't get third chances. You can't afford to make those mistakes. So having people mention you, guiding you, showing that path is massive to me in my career. And that's something as a leader, I'd want to I can't pay her back, but I can pay it forward, if you know what I mean. I can help the next generation of leaders in that way.
I want to bring David in a minute, Joe, but I want to come back to you because it's just yesterday, I think it was, somebody on a senior leadership team in a school said to me, but it's so hard to be heard because education can be hierarchical. How do I make my voice heard? How do I really get taken seriously and listened to?
I think it's about creating those spaces where we can have those open and honest conversations. I think the staff network that we've got in Oasis has been absolutely fantastic. Like I said at the start, it's not just a talking shop, it's not a moaning shop. We all know what the issues are, but actually there's a real level of expertise, there's real energy there. It's about crafting that energy into positive change. And the fact that there's buy-in at a senior level, the fact that the CEO attends the meetings, Steve as the founder attends the meetings, not that they're as participants to watch, not to give their views necessarily, but they're hearing what's been said. And what's really good is there's always a response. Anything we ask of or anything we put forward to them, we get a response. We might not always get what you want. It might not always be a yes, but there's a rationale, there's a justification. We know it's been heard, we know it's been listened to. And the impact that the group's made already has been, there's lots and lots of work to be done, don't get me wrong, but it's made a fantastic impact across the trust already. And that's going to transform the lives of teachers, and that's going to transform the lives of students. And it really does need to be a systems leader and sort of set the blueprint for other organisations. So I'm really passionate about creating these listening spaces and using those as a way to get people's views heard and drive things forward.
David, we saw you on that film. I guess it was a film, because if it wasn't a film, you've done a very quick change of clothes. But tell us more about this inclusive initial teacher training system. It's, as you said, it's a small beginning, but there are big hopes for it. Tell us why it's been started and what your goals are.
Brilliant, thanks, Steve. It's great to be with everyone this morning, and thanks to Joe and Dwain and Saqib for all your wisdom and thoughts so far, and your content just brilliant to listen to. So we, following Steve's conversation with Professor Robert Beckford, Steve and I and Joe actually and Paul, who you saw in the short film there, got together and began talking about this. And a way of working this out for us in Oasis was to approach the apprenticeship route through the Department of Education, as I mentioned in that film. That enables us to do a couple of things. Firstly, it enables us to work with people within Oasis's schools who might want to move from level 1 TA to level 3. They're people already in our communities who can bring that transformation. And the apprenticeship program really helps us there, because it funds their training, and they are also given, they're also employed. So it doesn't cost them anything, but it enables them to progress. Now we're starting at level 3, and as I said in the film, we're going to run it out of Manchester and in Birmingham and in Bristol. But our aim is to move to level 6 QTS and initial teacher training, and then level 7 educational leadership, to kind of begin to bring that representation that Dwain and Joe and others have spoken about into the leadership in our schools. But that's going to take us a little while to get there, because what we're doing is we are starting small so we get this right. And in that process, we are dismantling the barriers of how people apply to the level 3 TA program, and also how they are supported. Joe and the question in the chat there spoke about mentors, and each apprentice will be mentored through this by people in Oasis to help them achieve first at level 3, and then as we move towards it at level 6. But we're doing it to dismantle that intersectionality, all those things that come together to hold people back. And by dismantling those systems, people can progress. We're learning as well, and Joe and Dwain are involved in the creation of the curriculum for this as we write that. So that's kind of where we are at the moment, Steve.
Great, thank you, David. A question for you all, really. Well, actually, there's one little one for Saqib. You know, because I grew up on jalebi, my doctor says to me that I'm very close to becoming diabetic now, which happens to many South Indian people. So I have to cut back on them. I don't know how you manage to say slim and all the rest of it and still eat that stuff the whole time. It's wonderful.
Is that the question, Steve? Yeah, so a balanced diet is really important, isn't it? And recognizing what your like underlying, I guess, like health symptoms could be based on your ethnic origin is also a really important thing to have in our curriculum itself.
Yeah, that's in actual fact, that's the reality of it. South Asians tend to become diabetic as they get older, probably linked to that diet, such other things. So as I looked at that that wonderful slide, it was so appetizing, but I know it's so bad for me. There you go. A question for you all, though. It's from somebody who's responsible for another MAT, Multi-Academy Trust. It's got around 20 schools in, and they're simply saying it's really, really difficult to recruit and get representation at a school governance level, which reflects community. I suppose that is at board level, but it's at local governance level in terms of the schools that are part of the trust. How do you go about it? How can you better engage parents and a diversity of parents in your leadership or of the academy, or your within Oasis? Of course, we don't have governing bodies as such, but we have what we call hub councils that do the same thing. It's about parent and local community representation. How do you create diversity in that, encourage diversity in that? I don't know, I guess you'd all have different experiences with that. Who wants to talk about that?
I could talk first. There's already established networks which can help you increase your diversity in governance. So I'm going to plug Sharon Warmington. And if you have a look at her website, mbgn.co.uk, that's the National Black Governors Network. And she will provide you with step-by-step kind of instruction of how to increase that population. So I'll give you an example. She talks in the slides, the average age of a governor is 60 to 75. And bear in mind how many schools we've got around the country, and 96% of which are white British. So she's got established networks who ties into these different schools, and she does actually provide training as well. Also, local universities. I received the email last week from the University of Manchester calling out for the alumni who've gone into teaching professions to become governors. So there are established networks, but also we have to promote in schools. Like if you think realistically, anyone's used in education, when's the last time you spoke about governance in assemblies to parents in parents' evening? How have we promoted this to ensure that we can get that representation from the global diaspora to join that vital role of running our schools? So yeah, that's my input.
Can you just give us that website address again, Dwain?
Yeah, it's nbgn.co.uk. So that's the National Black Governors Network, run by Sharon Warmington.
Brilliant, really useful. Joe or Saqib?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Steve, that it's very much about having an outward-facing kind of agenda, and so inviting in local businesses to the school, inviting in parents to the school. So at Shirley Park, for example, every morning is an open morning for us. Parents can go and call the office, book in a slot to come around the school and just be in the school for a while. And so bringing the community into your school is really important. And so the types of community that you might want to bring in are definitely your local church communities, your local synagogue or your mosque communities, local voluntary groups too. But beyond that, business leaders in the area, so Black and ethnic business leaders in the area, reach out to them, invite them to the school, get them involved in the school. And from that, you can grow relationships that mean that actually you can pull in people for governance agendas thereafter.
A lot of schools become closed, don't they? I think this is something I've recognized as I've been involved in education. And the tougher the job on the inside, the more energy it takes. So you see how a school shuts down to its community, not intentionally, but because everybody's got their heads down. There's Ofsted to satisfy, and there are SATs and GCSEs, etc., etc. All the internal issues overwhelm that external outreach. How do you hold that in balance?
It's really about tapping into resources in the local community. I mean, it's really easy to internalize an agenda in schools, isn't it? Because, as you said, there's so much going on in-house. But actually, when you start reaching out to local voluntary groups, for example, you realize that there's a whole wealth of resource out there that you can bring into the school, and it can almost become a wraparound care for the school. And so the hub councils in Oasis work very much around that kind of agenda itself. But for me personally, for example, in Croydon, there is an organisation called Croydon Voluntary Aid, and around the table sit many different services in Croydon themselves. And so I do my best on a Friday at 11 o'clock to try and be there, even if it's just for half an hour, to represent not just my school, but other schools in the area too. And so forging those links, for me as a principal, is really important in the local community to see what kind of work is going on in community outreach work, because often those services themselves have got so much going on that they don't link into schools. And so being proactive and being intentional about the fact that actually, you know, that African proverb of it takes a village to raise a child, it takes our whole community to really look after our children, and building those relationships with the community should be an integral part of all schools.
Joe, you talked about listening. That was the main theme of what you were saying, and various elements coming out of that. Listening's a really painful thing to do. How do people listen and not fall out?
I think sometimes, especially when it's issues with race, you need to leave your fragility at the door. I mean, these are difficult conversations, they're challenging conversations, but they're not conversations to shy away from. All too often, if we're talking about curriculum, they're saying, oh, don't put it for our youngest children, don't put it in early years, don't put it in year one, it's too hard for them to hear. But actually, if our children are experiencing racism on a day-to-day basis, other children are more than capable to hear about it and learn about it. If you use the example of Ruby Bridges, who's one of the first Black child to go to a desegregated school in America. She went to school in amidst protests, placards with a police escort. If she's expecting she can handle that, and she's thriving now. Our youngest children can learn about racism. And adults, if they're in a position of power, a position of trust, these are people's lives they're dealing with. They need to be culturally aware, they need to be culturally sensitive, they need to be anti-racist, because this is just so important. It's difficult, but you can't make mistakes with it. I always liken it to safeguarding. You couldn't consistently keep making the same mistake over and over again with safeguarding. It's just unheard of. But the damage of racism can be equal to safeguarding issues. So that's why it's so important, and it should have such a priority.
Thank you, Joe. Dwain, a question for you. It says, for Dwain, do Black teachers need to focus on diversity champion roles or pastoral roles, or teaching and learning roles to progress in the teaching profession? Which route or routes would you recommend, and why? And they said, what would the others of you think about that?
I believe, especially with Black and global practitioners, not to be restricted down a particular route. Typically, when there are Black teachers who join the profession, they do go down a behaviour role. That's the role I went down. Due to the connection and the relationship what you have with the students, but you should never restrict yourself to a pathway what you want to attain to. So for instance, I do suggest to look into curriculum and look into those wider spectrums where you can start making a wider impact within the school. So again, if it's your route and it's your passion to go down a pastoral route, 100% follow that route. Like I said, there are coaches, there are mentors as well, which will build you up in different sectors as well. So firstly, don't be restrictive. And whatever route you want to go down, yeah, definitely take that lead.
Any input from the others of you?
Yeah, I would echo what Dwain said in terms of like following your strengths. Anecdotally, my own experience has been that, yeah, when I started teaching in 2004, 2005, I very much built really strong, you know, and lasting relationships with my students, because they could identify with me in many ways. But beyond that, my career path was actually always academic. So I went from a head of department to a head of faculty to a lead practitioner of teaching and learning. And although the pastoral element was always a strength of mine, naturally, endemically, what I found was actually I became a much well-rounded practitioner, having chose the academic route myself. And so, yeah, you've got to do what's right for you, and you've got to really weigh it up. But ultimately, having a coach, having a mentor to kind of like allow you to kind of grow in a deliberate way is also really important.
David, can I ask you, you introduced yourself on the film as Oasis theology specialist. So tell us, why Oasis has a theology specialist and how that's relevant to this, or why it's relevant to this.
Thanks, Steve. It's a great question. Yeah, so my title is Theology and Learning Specialist. So the theology of the organisation, the way we understand who God is really important to Oasis. It drives our inclusive ethos, and we believe that kind of God is love, and God loves everyone, and everyone is included and has that opportunity. And I think that's really important for us. Now, we don't impose those beliefs on anyone, but it's important to know where Oasis comes from and how Oasis's story, its theology, drives us to be inclusive. So that's really, really important. And Steve, I know you could talk about this too really well, but I think what's really important for us is that we're inclusive because of our theology and our story, not because however important it is, it's on government's agenda, but we're inclusive because of our story, and that inclusion helps us and drives us to do the things that we're doing, and animates us and illuminates things like break the cycle. It enables us to do these things, and it kind of pushes us towards being inclusive of everyone, because we believe the kind of theology of the organization sees that God is love and God loves everyone.
An interesting thing, and then I've got one more question to just put to you all, really. An interesting thing, I think it was before the pandemic, before all of that, the government suggested they were going to introduce more grammar schools across the country. And this was at 6 o'clock in the morning. I first heard it. And so I wrote a little press release, at home by about 20 past 6 and sent it out. And we got quite a lot of coverage on why Oasis felt that introducing this second tier, this relates back to a question that someone asked earlier on, we have these two educational systems. So we were able to say that we didn't think this was a great way forward, and we were looking for more inclusion. And this was before levelling up was a thing, but a levelling up for everyone. And several people outside Oasis said to me afterwards, how could we respond so quickly to that without having to have a conference together about what we wanted to say? And of course, it's that thing, isn't it? It's that we all understand together what our values are, and we might not always live up to them, but we always know where they are. They're our North Star, they're our compass, they drive us forward. So I would simply say that's a thing for every group of schools, or every single school, isn't it? A values-driven thing. Someone called B has just said, as a therapist, and this is more of a comment than a question, but I wondered if we could come on it as we finish. She says, as a therapist, I see the damage done to children from Black and global majority communities. It is safeguarding, but it is ignored and is being something that we have to deal with. Racialized abuse experienced in schools is real every day, in our playgrounds, from primary school to high school and on to and including university. So she's saying for everything that's happening, this is the reality. And as a therapist, she sees the damage of that every day. Do you agree with that? And if you do, how do we hasten and bring about the arc of justice we talked about earlier that will end that? Is it possible?
Yeah, this is something I'm really passionate about. If you look at the statistics in Birmingham alone, Birmingham classifies children into, I think it's 22 ethnic groups. At the end of early years, EYFS for the children at 5, Black Caribbean children, a third out of that 22. By the time they get to the age 16 and do their GCSEs, they become their 21st out of 22, only ahead of traveller children who don't actually regularly attend school. And that just highlights what a massive issue it is. it's damaging, it's dangerous. It's not just in the playground, it's in the classrooms, it's the curriculum, it's how the children are treated, it's how people are handled. There's a whole range of things, a lack of cultural awareness, a lack of cultural sensitivity, whatever you want to call it. There's many issues there, and it's absolutely vital that we tackle this. Things like representation will help. It's actually about training staff, bringing staff on the journey to actually understand the communities they serve. I mean, a classic example is Black Caribbean children. They're seen as older than they actually are. And they suddenly they look dangerous, they're aggressive, they're rude, they're truculent in certain people's viewpoints, and those sorts of mindsets are really damaging to our children. And that's the sort of thing we really need to tackle if we're going to make a positive change.
This is why it's important to have a holistic approach rather than just focusing on one strand, such as curriculum. You have to see an anti-racist approach as tackling all these different strands, including policies and procedures, through looking into racist discrimination and all discrimination through a lens of safeguarding how it impacts our students and what you're going to do to bridge that gap to ensure that their health and well-being has been supported. I mentioned this in the last Break the Cycle. There was a massive spike in hate crime, especially racism nationally in 2020 during lockdown, where again, there was a lot of students who were impacted by racism. And we had to change what we're doing, and we had to look through everything through a trauma-informed lens. So I mentioned before, a title, what they used in America, was a culturally relevant education. For us, and I do believe for most schools in this country, we do have to be proactively anti-racist to cover all these separate areas to ensure that it is fully inclusive and we are challenging discrimination. So what we had to do is work through the lens of safeguarding and ensure that, number one, if there is racism, how we're supporting the student, and also how we're going to start re-educating the victim as well, and the perpetrator, to ensure that this doesn't happen, to break that cycle within the community and also within school. It's been a journey, and it's one of those where you have to be bold to say, actually, if this is where we stand and this is what the direction we're going, and if you do deviate from these policies, it is what it is. So again, I think more schools need to jump on that journey to ensure that we are protecting our students from all types of discrimination, but in particular, talking in this meeting cycle, racism and how it impacts their health and well-being.
Before you leap in, Saqib, it's worth saying, I was talking with someone who I have great respect for just a couple of weeks back, and as a senior educationalist nationally, and he pointed out to me that he'd witnessed that if an African Caribbean child gets a 5 in a GCSE, people tend to say, well done, well done. But if a Chinese child gets a 5 in a GCSE, the question is, well, why didn't you do better? And he said he'd come across that kind of attitude time after time around the country. So this is a complex thing, and it's a deep thing, isn't it? I don't know, Saqib, putting you on the spot a bit, picking up from what Joe and Dwain was saying, and with reference to that, what you'd say.
Yeah, Steve, so I'd say that question goes at the very core of why we're here, doesn't it? And why the very core of like why we're in this meeting. And it's so brilliant listening to Dwain and Joe, because actually the first time we met as in this kind of like forum was in 2019. And the meeting was very much focused on like strategic blue sky thinking of this is where we want to get to. And if you just look at the evolution of the conversations just today, actually, we're talking about operational things that are happening on the ground. And that's real change in itself. And I think so long as we focus on this agenda, so long as we continue to build the strategy and build the voice and build the operational element behind it all, and so long as we welcome everyone into this conversation and realize the importance behind that, I think the progress will itself, year on year be explicit. And so just the journey that we've been on in the last 3 years, around this forum has been clear just from today. And so I think the growth of this very agenda is a part of that solution in itself. Steve, you're on mute, I think.
I keep doing that, and useless. Can I just say thank you to all 4 of you for your contribution, which is very real and is very sacrificial and very ongoing. But you are part, all 4 of you, are the engine that's making a difference, not just to Oasis schools, but there are lots of other schools listening in right now, please please contribute this message for everyone. Contribute what you have to bring, because together we make this journey forward. Thanks, David. Thanks, Dwain. Thanks, Saqib. Thanks, Joe. Thank you very much.